3 months into the Gaza ceasefire, the United Nations and partners have delivered tons of food and medical supplies and carried out critical repairs. But the UN says that's only a temporary solution. As the UN describes it, for the Palestinians in Gaza, their lives continue to be defined by displacement, trauma, uncertainty and deprivation, compounded by severe recurrent storms. Meanwhile, after 2 years of forced disruption caused by the conflict, children in Gaza are slowly returning to learning, not in traditional classrooms, but inside makeshift tent schools set up amid the widespread destruction. CGTN's Nara Al-Tibi has more from Gaza City.
In western Gaza City, a temporary tent school has become a rare space of learning for children who were cut off from education for nearly 2 years. With most school buildings damaged or destroyed, education here has shifted to emergency initiatives run by international organizations and local partners, offering basic lessons under extremely limited conditions.
After education was interrupted for 2 years due to the war on Gaza, we were able at Arbell School to resume the learning process and bring students back to their desks.
For students, returning to school doesn't mean a return to normal life. Classrooms are tents, resources are scarce, but the desire to learn remains strong.
We returned to our Arbell school after the war to achieve our dreams. Even though it's made of tents, we want to study and fulfill our ambitions.
Teachers say the long interruption has left deep gaps in students' learning, especially in core skills that form the foundation of education.
After 2 years without schooling, we noticed that students' levels are very weak. Many struggle with spelling, writing, and reading, and there is a clear gap in basic skills.
The UN Relief Agency for Palestine, UNRWA, which once operated 288 schools in Gaza, says 91% of all of school buildings will require full reconstruction or major rehabilitation work to be functional again.
In Gaza, tents are no longer used only to shelter the displaced. They are now filling the gap left by destroyed schools. Education here has become a daily struggle to protect the future as a generation clings to learning amid deep uncertainty. Nadir Al-Tibi, CGTN, Gaza City.
Later, we'll be joined by our panel, but we begin with Dr. Mads Gilbert. He's a Norwegian medical doctor, professor emeritus, and author who spent years volunteering at hospitals in Gaza. Dr. Gilbert, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, there is some aid getting into Gaza. The UN's World Food Programme reports that it can now supply food to up to 1 million Palestinians in the besieged enclave. What is your assessment of conditions there right now? Is there still a threat of famine?
Absolutely, and it's been going on for the better part of 2 years. So this is too little too late, because many of the medical consequences of the lack of nutrition is, of course, lifelong staining of your health. And with a population that constitutes half with children, of course, this famine, this Israeli-engineered famine, has already taken severe tolls, both in number of death and also in the medical long-term consequences. So I'd like to remind you that humanitarian support is actually a non-negotiable virtue of the international society. If you have an earthquake or you have a flooding or what have you, the humanitarian support is mandatory, and you don't argue, you don't negotiate on that. But Israel, on their part, with the support of the United States, have been using this self-evident humanitarian support as a bargaining chip, and they still constrain the influx, they delay it, and they do not allow, for example, mobile homes, more tents, solar panels, and reconstruction material to enter Gaza.
I want to talk a little more about the state of healthcare in this occupied territory. I mean, the medical destruction in Gaza has been catastrophic. We've seen that Israel has leveled hospitals and clinics. It's killed hundreds of medical workers, including doctors. It's also blocked the supply of critical medical supplies, which has forced doctors in many instances to carry out surgery, sometimes amputations, many of them involving children, without the use of things like anesthetics. What is the state of healthcare in the territory?
Well, the state of healthcare is still disastrous because you have basically two large groups of patients. One group are those who have been injured by the Israeli bombing. And let me remind your viewers that since the ceasefire in October, the Israelis have been continuing the bombing attacks. The last news today is that 11 Palestinians were killed, among them 3 journalists, the last 24 hours in Gaza. So there has been more than 400 killed and thousands injured during only the last ceasefire period. So that's one group of patients who needs badly advanced surgical care. The other group is, of course, those with chronic non-communicable diseases, cardiovascular diseases, stroke, myocardial infarction, cancer, psychiatric patients, and they are also denied access to a functioning healthcare because the Israeli occupation army has so systematically, as you said, destroyed, undermined, and bombed the healthcare system. And they've actually killed more than 1,700 healthcare workers. I talk to Gaza almost every day. I had a long conversation with one of my colleagues yesterday. They do a heroic job. The Palestinian healthcare workers, the doctors, the nurses, the medical students, not at least, the paramedics, the pre-hospital and primary healthcare people. But that cannot fulfill the needs of 2 million people having been incarcerated for 2 years. And most people don't understand it. Gaza is a concentration camp. It's more than 2 million people who are not allowed to escape or to leave, and at the same time being denied food, water, medical supplies, and being bombed. So it is a nightmarish scenario that has been going on for more than 2 years now without the international community standing up to its humanitarian and international obligations of securing basic human rights for everyone, also for the Palestinian people.
How is the medical situation, the healthcare situation in Gaza being made worse by the fact that almost all the people in Gaza have been displaced at one time or another? Many people have been displaced several times, and the UN estimates nearly all of Gaza's over 2 million residents have been displaced by Israel's relentless bombing. We now have a severe winter, which has taken grip in the territory. So can that contribute to even more disease in the territory? How can that be countered?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. And of course, I'm an emergency doctor. I live in the Arctic in North Norway. We know the consequences of hypothermia, just to have a lowered body temperature below 35 centigrades, will exacerbate, will make disease and injuries much more dangerous. For example, you bleed much more if you're cold than if you're warm. So this induced hypothermia, by denying people shelter and heating sources, by itself will aggravate both trauma and chronic diseases. In addition, the unprotected, like the infants and the children and the elders, are actually dying from hypothermia. They virtually freeze to death. And the last number from the UN updated are that 9 infants have frozen to death in Gaza since December because of lack of protection. So as a medical doctor, I know that the most important way that we can safeguard the health for the people, it's not by only fancy ambulance helicopters and very high quality university hospitals. It is the basic provision of shelter, security, water, food, warmth. If we provide that, the medical needs will be much less than if the population is exposed to this lack of nutrition, to heat, and to protection. So yes, you're right. The precondition, the sort of ramification of the living in Gaza makes the health, and the chance of survival much worse than if they had been treated like decent people with equal rights. So what we see is actually a very graphic illustration of a full-blown apartheid system, because we would not have allowed any other state than Israel to treat a population of civilians in the way that the 2.1 million people in Gaza and also in the West Bank are treated currently, while the world leaders are silently accepting it because they do not put pressure on Israel.
You know, our reporter just showed us young children in a temporary tent school in Gaza. Al Jazeera reported that children have to run the gauntlet of Israeli snipers to try and get to these tent schools. They try to get to some level of normalcy for children in the territory. Talk to us about the lasting psychological, medical, and societal impact that the Israeli onslaught is having on children.
That's a very key question, because all of us who know the Palestinian people and their culture know that the Palestinian people are known for its eagerness and its thirst for knowledge. They have a very, very high level of education, both at sort of primary school, high school, and university level. And the Israelis have actually erased all the 10 universities in Gaza. According to the latest UN report, and by the way, all my numbers are from UN reporting, 63 university buildings have been completely demolished. I used to be a visiting professor at Al-Azhar University in Gaza City. It's completely gone. And the same with many of the primary schools and the colleges. So this eradication of the Palestinian education system, combined with the trauma of so many families having lost parents, grandparents, and children. Don't forget, more than 100,000 people have been killed, and among them almost 30,000 children during these last 2.5 years. This will make a massive psychological impact on the children, because the schools are not only a place for learning. The schools in Palestine, as everywhere else in the world, is a key part of the psychosocial network for children when they grow up. That's where they find the peer support through nice teachers. That's why they can sustain a lot of everyday trauma, because they have the support from that social network. So eradicating universities, high schools, and primary schools in Gaza is part of the greater picture of taking hope away from the Palestinian people to break their backbone in order to have them to surrender. So this is all part of a very systematic, different aspects of the genocide, which aims at, of course, colonizing and displacing the Palestinian people, ethnic cleansing and genocide. That's the bottom line for all of these different actions we see. It's a system of oppression.
Dr. Mads Gilbert, thanks for joining us, sir.
Thank you so much.
There's much more to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Xavier Abu Eid is a political scientist and former advisor to the Palestine Liberation Organization. Chris McIntosh serves as a Humanitarian Response Advisor with Oxfam Gaza. And Dan Arbell is a scholar in residence at American University Center for Israeli Studies. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Dan Arbell, let me start with you. As I pointed out, around 460 Palestinians have been killed since that ceasefire was announced. 1,200 have been injured. Just today, 11 Palestinians, including 2 children and 3 journalists, were killed in Israeli attacks. What is your assessment of where things stand right now?
I think that at this point, as Trump just announced in recent days the transition from phase 1 of his Gaza plan to phase 2, then I think that the focus is, of course, on these efforts of disarming Hamas, demilitarizing the Gaza Strip, beginning to establish new institutions to oversee the situation in Gaza. Of course, the loss of life is regrettable. It's tragic. And one would have hoped that, once a ceasefire is announced, things would calm down and this would not be the case. But we are unfortunately witnessing continued violence, and this is something that hopefully will subside. And I think that at this point, though, we have to be hopeful, at least, that this new phase announced would be implemented, and we'll start seeing movement on the ground towards more stabilization of Gaza and also beginning of reconstruction in the future.
Xavier, I mentioned that figure of around 460 Palestinians being killed since the announcement of the ceasefire. Well, there were more than 100 children, according to UNICEF, who are among those killed in that period. And a senior Hamas official also told Al Jazeera that Israel has not released all women and children that they're holding in Israeli prisons under the terms of that agreement. But the fact that there is no stability in Gaza right now, the fact that the level of violence has not been brought down to what many had hoped, can one transition to phase two?
Thanks for having me here. I think the first thing that we have to look into is whether phase one was completed. And I think in reality, phase one was not completed. In fact, Israel continues to condition the entry of humanitarian aid, which was not supposed to be like this at this stage. And I think, unfortunately, what we are facing today could be either a PR event by the US administration, or on the other side, something which is way more dangerous, which is the US trying to impose an alternative to the United Nations. That's what we are witnessing now. And let's remember very well that all of this ceasefire and the Board of Peace and things that we are going to be talking about in the show came from a Security Council resolution 2803 that does not even state that the end game is a Palestinian state or end in the Israeli occupation. Therefore, I'm not really very optimistic about the next days.
Okay, Chris McIntosh, good to have you with us. Chris, let's talk about the humanitarian situation, the aid situation in Gaza. According to the Gaza Government Media Office, from October 10th last year, that's when the ceasefire was announced, to January 9th this year, a little over 23,000 trucks entered Gaza. Those are trucks with aid. The agreement called for 54,000 trucks to be allowed in. So less than half have actually got in. Let's listen to someone in Gaza. This is Ahmad Othman, who was displaced in Gaza. He's telling us about the conditions that he is facing there. Let's listen.
Our lives have been turned upside down. Our life is filled with hardship and sorrow. We waited for a truce. We waited for life to go on and continue, for aid to arrive, and for us to live with dignity. We didn't get anything. We didn't find any of it. Our situation remains the same, only getting worse. Every day we hear news. We wake up in the morning and check for news that there would be progress in our lives. So we would return to our old lives and return to our homes.
Now, Chris, Israel has also banned more than 36 humanitarian aid organizations, including your organization, Oxfam as well. So what are you seeing on the ground, and what happens once that deadline to cease operations is reached?
Yeah, all good questions. So I would say the humanitarian situation right now is characterized by the destruction that's left in the wake of the intense bombardment of the last two and change years that we're looking at in Gaza. And it can hardly be underestimated or overestimated, excuse me, to be very honest with you. The level of reconstruction that's necessary to elevate people back to normal levels of human decency, of human dignity, cannot be overestimated at this stage. There are still hundreds of thousands of people without clean drinking water. There are still an estimated 1 to 1.5 million people that are living in tents right now, in cold temperatures, in flooding conditions, with nothing but flimsy material between themselves and the elements right now. In addition, people are attempting to warm their domiciles, such as they are, and that's starting tent fires in these camps, which is horrendous. There are additionally Gazans who are seeking shelter from the rain and the wind inside damaged buildings that are now collapsing. So I think it's very important to remember that the destruction that was wrought against Gaza in the past years is still there. And due to the fact, and I'd like to touch on a point that Dan mentioned about reconstruction, absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Reconstruction must happen. The Israeli authorities are not permitting construction materials in, not even to the tune of sandbags and cement. Right now, a bag of cement is going for 1,800 shekel, approaching $500. So when we're at that stage, it's not very hopeful to start the reconstruction so that people can move back in and, as I said, live with some dignity in their lives. That's desperately needed.
So, Chris, briefly, what kind of aid is Oxfam getting into the territory? And is there some kind of distribution infrastructure in place there to get the aid to people?
We're getting very little. There's some material that's coming in by commercial routes, but as far as our ability to bring in humanitarian aid, we're still being stifled by the Israeli authorities. We're making do with what we have. One of our main programs has to do with water, sanitation, and hygiene. So it's getting clean drinking water to the people and also siphoning off the dirty water, so to speak. And we're making do with the resources that we have with a lot of ingenuity, particularly from our Gazan staff. But as always, as it's been for months, our efforts are heavily hindered by these disallocations.
Dan Arbell, you were talking about phase 2 earlier on. Well, Gaza's government said it's ready to transfer power to a technocratic committee. In the meantime, the United States has announced the formation of this Board of Peace, and it's far more expansive and far more ambitious than the one that was initially announced. This is all part of phase 2, and there's now opposition in Israel, and we see this opposition in the Israeli cabinet as well to the composition of these different institutions that need to be set up under phase 2 of the agreement, rather. So do you realistically see this happen? I mean, will Israel cede power to either of these committees, this technocratic committee or the Board of Peace?
Yeah, so certainly these new institutions that have been announced, the proof is in the pudding, whether they'll actually start operating and implementing policy, devising policy and implementing policy. And that's still, there's a big question surrounding that. Israel opposed the participation of senior representatives of Qatar and Turkey in the Board of Peace's implementation body, and still does oppose. It seems that the U.S. is not too impressed by Israel's opposition and insists on having Turkey and Qatar there as a measure, as a face-saving measure, or in order to make Israel feel better. Netanyahu himself has been invited to be a member of the Board of Peace, and we just heard news today that Israel has approved Netanyahu's participation as a member in that Board of Peace. But as Chris described, the challenges on the ground are immense. They require all bodies that have been announced to operate and function in a proper manner, cooperatively, and work with all the international and local actors. And it's very hard to see how that gets off the ground, especially as Israel continues to insist that alongside the effort to humanitarian effort, there will be an effort to disarm Hamas and demilitarize Gaza. So how do all those pieces of the puzzle come together is not clear at this point. There's a lot of work ahead for those members of the different institutions that have been announced.
Xavier Abu Eid, talking about this Board of Peace, it was supposed to be a temporary solution to replace Hamas, but now the Trump administration has announced, as I said, a far more ambitious agenda for this board. It will be some kind of board. I mean, some are saying it could be an alternative to the United Nations, but it will be involved in some way in global stability if Trump gets his way, if this board is indeed established. But how great is the fear that Palestinians feel that they would have solutions imposed on them, that they will not be part of the solution, but rather just have to accept what is prescribed to them?
Well, in fact, that's how the model works in Gaza. You have a technocratic body of Palestinians that are by the way, very highly appreciated in Gaza by people because of their history and technocratic work, but they are not going to produce policy. They're simply going to implement what this quote-unquote Board of Peace is going to impose on them. And it's extremely problematic because at the same time that we are having this Board of Peace imposed upon Gaza, we have Israeli forces demolishing the headquarters of UNRWA in Jerusalem, in occupied Jerusalem, which I think it's very telling of how things are moving ahead. We are at a turning point whereby at this stage, no one wants to talk about a Palestinian state. No one wants to talk about ending the Israeli occupation, the reuniting Gaza in the West Bank. And of course, no one mentions even justice or accountability for those who committed a genocide against the Palestinian people. In other words, what the Trump administration has been doing, they have been trying to separate completely the humanitarian aspects that are definitely needed and much needed in Gaza as well as here in the occupied West Bank from the political files. And when you separate both at this stage, you're basically saying there will be no solution in the short or mid-term.
Chris, as I mentioned, Israel had banned 37 humanitarian aid organizations, including yours, Oxfam. But now we hear that Israel has bulldozed the Jerusalem headquarters of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. It's long accused this agency, known as UNRWA, of collaborating with Hamas. The UN, for itself, has pointed out that the destruction of UNRWA is a violation of a ruling from the International Court of Justice. This is the organization that's been operating in Gaza, in the occupied West Bank as well, for decades. What impact is this going to have?
Well, if I could answer the question this way, what impact, what is this a symptom of fundamentally? And what this is Israel once again conducting a full frontal assault on humanitarians writ large, whether it be organizations like my own and our peer agencies who've been shut out of entering Gaza, or it's UNRWA or other UN agencies. Fundamentally, what I've seen over the past year of working in Gaza is that Israel has no interest in humanitarian actors doing our work. What they want to do is create a situation in which fundamentally every Gazan is beholden upon the Israelis to provide every means of support. We saw it with these so-called Gaza Humanitarian Fund hubs that happened this summer and earlier in 2025. And we're seeing it now. This is a systematic, slow, attritionist approach to dismantling any sort of humanitarian support in the Strip. And of course, characteristically, characterizing it as something that's necessary under the security of the state of Israel. And I think what we've seen, and thank you, Javier, for mentioning it, the genocide and the famine that was created by Israel in 2025. This is a state that has blossomed completely with a right-wing agenda that was always there. And now we're seeing true colors.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arlen Naidu in Washington.